imagine logic and critical thinking. Unit 2, well, basic concepts of logic. Mani video badak din. Mani differentiating deductive and inductive arguments. Ta dong de kon deductive and inductive argument da kada. Ka video chu wan chu kon deductive argument kana load inductive argument chu kon kalat de chu kon kalat ke detail go along makini gwich diu gwich nok ko dena manada ko loidu. Okay, Chaneto. Our dear learners, we have said earlier that the distinction between the inductive and deductive arguments lies in the strengths of an argument. Inferential claim. Wa nyech chana ella deno that inductive and deductive argument. Why take a bomb inferential claim? The key bomb to come premise ke kan conclusion. La inductive argument bomb the ten ko yelong la probably key take do no ka mutually deductive argument bomb the ten bomb did long la necessarily la we badil ten on ke lude la necessarily can probably then that mutually deductive can inductive argument necessarily we get deductive can probably key ke do we get inductive argument. In other words, the distinction lies on how strongly the conclusion is claimed to follow from the premise, or how strongly the premise are claimed to support the conclusion. Wa malat kono kala dong na mane lodne ta dong conclusion ta dong to conclusion ben boom gade ke premise ki ta dong ja conclusion log along gade the premise. Quella deductive argument log a conclusion like fully 100%. Do know quella mutually inductive argument log the probably quick on dong 80% while 60% done. Do know deductive argument premise log a conclusion 100% law a necessity. Do know inductive argument co probability 100% do know take a peg at no quick on a peg man. 100% allow a probability. However, in most arguments, the strength of this claim is not explicitly stated. So we must use the interpretive abilities to evaluate it. However, in most arguments, the strength of this is not explicitly stated. So we must use our interpretive abilities to evaluate. Wa argument tanken chamala dode ngoi. De ko man ngai ke strengths den dumno ban system ban ke use kala de kon evaluate kede. In deciding whether an argument is deductive or inductive, we must look at certain objective features of an argument. Melar kon argument is deductive ki inductive goro te de kon kala ji argument the te de kon ji argument. There are three factors that influence the decision that deductiveness of or inductiveness of an argument inferential claim. Why te dok to know the no de don lari inductive wala de lari deductive argument. La doctor ton maniam occurrence of spatial connector words. La ta dong de indicator wa na de greten be. La indicator wa na to know do in me inductive kana wa na to know do in me ni deductive. Rather the actual strengths of inferential link between the premise and conclusion. Boom rom premise ke kan conclusion. Chit ke inductive gwamen premise kan conclusion rom ka 100% ke deductive. Do know ke inductive gwami ko probability rom ka ki bomb to come din ki bond to come din ti bomb boom long mete ke inductive. Wana mane wa de ku kede. The audience the character or a form of argumentation the users use. Why form ku user lat la wata ku user right la form na tena ban ke gwit ke video bukula video bangwanden kene video bia walian video bangwanden bana deductive argument form no ban ke gwit ko la video walian bana inductive argument form no ban ke gwit. However, we must acknowledge that outset the many arguments in ordinary language are incomplete, and because of this, deciding whether the argument should best be interpreted as deductive or inductive may be impossible. Wakatangun te roine te argument re roine wa chike incomplete ni ki chicken teng wa eno chicken teng mon dong da kon jaga jawo chikon da melong kamalat kon and many deductive key inductive. Let us see the above factors in detail in order to understand and identify the different styles of argumentation. What is kon kalad ni amgwa men chitke occurrence of special indicator word can actual strings or inferential claim between premise and conclusion can a character and form of argumentation the arguer use what to understand kaman go ke detail be ko bakulo loy dan go and that inductive can a deductive argument. The first factor that influences our decision about the certain inferential claim is occurrence of special indicator word. Jakon de ko loko de kon inductive can a deductive argument dakede wa mutually indicator word ki wa na to nyodo ina mani inductive ki na mani deductive la wa na to nyodo na mani deductive kana na mani inductive la tare ka lat kama ci kon lat ka conclusion indicator kana premise indicator do no go ka indicator to nyot na mani deductive ki na mani inductive. There are different sorts of indicator word that indicate or mark the types of certain argument. What indicator one to one long to content to know the argument mit a deduction or induction. What indicator to one to content argument may contain some words that indicate the arguer's certainty and confidence, or arguer's uncertainty or doubt about the truth of his or her conclusion. Why arguer kiram right dong da machar confidence da la certainty da la kana certainty kana doubt wa da ka la ke no now words like wa when to choose certainly necessarily absolutely definitely indicate the argument should be taken as deductive. La kula when to chwale certainty necessarily ke absolutely ke definitely wa mi ke jega passage la no mon ñu do passage mon deductive argument do no when to chwale probable ke improbable ke plausible implausible likely unlikely reason to conclude suggest the argument indicate suggest the argument is inductive. Do know why not return? Not can argument inductive. No go yenge go la to when to be inductive like not can probability. Chicken non certainty. Chicken lana door 100%. Do know la why not deductive not can certainty law. Lel can door 100% like definitely, absolutely, necessarily, and certainly. The point is that if an argument draws its conclusion using either of the deductive indicator words, it is usually the best interpret is as deductive. Wa no michi arguer key argument micha conclusion micha gog micha read la gog conclusion micha read ke deductive indicator want to con which definitely certainly necessarily ton wa mi ta go ko nyo de o no mon da deductive. But if it draws conclusion using either of the inductive indicator word, it's usually best to interpret it as inductive. Do no mi che go da mi che ngun ke indicator ke inductive indicator word che probably ke likely no wonder wa mi che conclusion mi che read ke na no man nyo do dong da inductive. Note that the phrase "it must be the case that" is ambiguous. Actually, it must be the case that ambiguous key. Like da con da con must indicate either probably or necessity. Why must? The probability key can necessarily allow a lady to come down. Okay. Then. It must be the case that Iran chip nang lao dong deductive karwad. Don't know a probability lao take a kandar. Okay. Deductive and inductive indicator words often suggest the correct interpretation. While deductive can inductive indicator word come con interpretation ga ki Lloyd or gamuga. However, one should be cautious about the special indicator words because if they conflict with one of other criteria, we should probably ignore them. What do know the correct special indicator word ko dong chicken de ke criteria and ko la criteria and dan job ko wa dong de correct tit ke. For arguers often use phrases such as "it certainly follows that" for rhetorical purpose to add impact to their conclusion and not to suggest that the argument taken as a deductive. Watch it keta arguer dawa "it certainly follows that" la ladichi ku tobne impact bang la ku add impact chalo no dong ku gogno dor ke deductive wa tangen no manda kon daga da dur kon goro de kon ge gejetan. Similarly, some arguers, not knowing the distinction between inductive and deductive, will claim to deduce a conclusion when their argument is more correctly interpreted as inductive. Wa arguer ba muki inductive kan deductive dong da wo go go ke deduce ka dong argument dong induction. Yeah. What no there are if one takes those words as at 5 value, then one might wrongly lead into wrong conclusion. Wa mitran when don mitran ga kan miran ga biduga dong mitran ga kanun ono dong de ranu ka wrong conclusion wal dong jiran do che de conclude. Therefore, the occurrence of indicator words is not a certain guarantee for deductiveness or inductiveness of an argument, unless it is supported by other features. This leads us to consider the second following factor. Wa mamana nyoda enoti indicator word wa charong ko da halare ina meye angada namaye deductive key inductive wacharong kuno goro bukoro dare bado kola namanu bakon ka rodo mi kola key the actual strings of inferential link between allow rodo naman chikon lade the second that builds upon the interpretation of an argument as inductive and deductive is the actual strings of inferential link between the premise and conclusion. Why boom room premise and conclusion? Boom gaga boom 100% the money is deductive. Ki boom like 100% yang no ka person it then one the money is inductive. If the conclusion actually does follow with strict necessity from the premise, the conclusion is clearly deductive. And tell our own. In such an argument, it is impossible for premise to be true and conclusion to be false. Waka argument is deductive. Chademon to go dong the premise da true ka be conclusion ba false. Wa chademon to and bega wakan her. If on the other hand the conclusion does not follow strictly necessarily but follows with the probability, then which premise can conclusion which can follow can necessity ki ka bomb can necessity ki ku rod follow ka probability one mana dong do ko nang la inductive argument. Watch an example then tan chan ten tan gaman go. All Ethiopian peoples love their country. The Bebe is an Ethiopian, therefore the Bebe loves his country. Our Ethiopia no can wait in. The Bebe are an Ethiopian. Kono the Bebe no go hidden. Kono the Bebe no go hidden. Karo our majority of Ethiopian peoples are poor. Ethiopia don't want long can eat Chan. Alamuddin is an Ethiopian. Alamuddin are an Ethiopian. Therefore, Alamuddin is poor. Gono Alamuddin a Chan. In the first example, the conclusion follows with strict necessity from the premise. Waga chadanam conclusion could flow strict necessity. Key premise ne lokan conclusion ka top de kelu ki 100%. Kota mu ki kona chawaji Ethiopia dia la ka love their country and da lo no na ram la ran Ethiopia no go hedian ka chawo de bebe ran Ethiopia de bebe ran Ethiopia and da lo no de bebe no go hedian ko chawo na ran Ethiopia kelu no go hedian na mani mu la premise ne lokan conclusion ka top de kelu ka 100% ka tele di wo to de ko ne jekte dung no ka example ro do gwamen cha follow ka strict necessity kitnen ka probability kitnen den ga dong gwamen o gwa ta jon kon the majority of Ethiopian peoples are poor la ni dong wana long Ethiopia e kan ni chan ala mulo no e ta na go ka ni rang o gwa cho Alamudini ran Ethiopia cho Alamudini ran Ethiopia atam quick kon ma Alamudin mi te ka ni dong wan te chan ton wala te ka ni ti an rang yang no gwa to kon bin jo ga Alamudini pur ko quick kon la no nyo de no de a probability na ma probability mi dit ko ta kon jo ga ni dong wan long ke e ka ni chan and then you know probability ma de Alamudin da chan ge de mi dit ka probability dong de Alamudin da ramariang dang ge so Rodman de kon reading inductive ku follow with the probability ku follow ka dong la chelel ka 100% dia chatemoto di sajekten chikon ka gudeta dong de kon inductive kana deductive argument gi kida the audience woman mutual interpretation occasionally as argument contains no special indicator word and conclusion does not follow either necessarily and probability from the premises. In other words, it does not follow at all. The situation points up to need the third factors in to taken to be account. Why don't argument don't da tell indicator word I don't da tell inferential claim one man da kon nango da kon form of argument da kon which the character form of argument da kon which character form of argument rawotan the eventual deductive argument form can inductive argument form la ban ke video dong bên cái thế điều chặt thêm mất rồi thì sẽ biết đến là cho con cái là ta đóng để còn deductive cái này inductive đã cái đấy and để còn bị cái indicator word cái này inferential cái này strings of inferential link cái này form and style of argument điều chặt thêm mất rồi thì sẽ biết đến cái video nó để con ban form nó đã rồi bắt cái cái video nó đã rồi gua ni chlo de test ko challenge channel bukan rom ko video dong